guys, and welcome back to part 3. Anyways, go subscribe to this person. I am shouting out almost all my subscribers that do have videos. Anyways, go shout out to them, and let's get on with the video.
Dead. They can't do anything, you know? And I hate people think that's okay. I don't think it's okay. And it's like, oh, it's what he imagined he could have done. It's like, no, you're dealing with a person that actually is, her case is still unsolved. So, like, that alone makes this show garbage to me, personally. I don't know why I'm getting so emotional about this, but it's just frustrating. Like, if I was approached to do a role like that, I would outright be like, what is this? Like, in doing 2 minutes of research and saying, this is so disrespectful to the victim and their family. I'm good, you know? And I don't want to be a hater and stuff, but, like, the quotes that I read, because I was doing research on this, and obviously, you know, there's quotes of Ryan Murphy and the actors and all the stuff, but Addison's quotes are just, like, so tone deaf. It was unbelievable. And she said in an interview, she was asked, tell us a little bit about your character and how she fits into the story. Addison Rae answered word for word, Evelyn in the story is a babysitter to 2 really sweet children. I did research before I filmed about Evelyn. There's actually not much about her. There's a lot. It was the largest search for any human in Wisconsin in history at that point, okay? They don't really know exactly what happened in real life, so it was really interesting for me as an actor to lean into something that there was minimal information about. You know that Ed Gein didn't do it if you did a minute of research, and you know that there is no evidence that she was killed. Like, there, I would just be like, no. Like, what are we doing? But what do I know? Maybe I'm just too sensitive to this stuff. And then she was asked, what do you think people find so interesting about the Monster Anthology series? Addison says, I think it's really wild to see a picture being painted that feels so insightful and honest and raw and challenging in a lot of ways. It brings so
Okay, so I'm gonna pause and get back to y'all when I get finished with
much light to
Anyways, just got done now.
Things that maybe people didn't explore before. I didn't know much about Ed Gein other than what movies were made based off him. Seems like you still don't. Nobody does that watch this. If anybody watched the show and thinks they learned anything about Ed Gein, they didn't. They learned like maybe 20%, if that. Anyway, she continues, so it was interesting to dive into that in a different way and also speak to Charlie, someone that had such an intimate understanding of who Ed Gein was. And listen, I'm not gonna blame the actors because it's their job to act, and it's not necessarily their job to do the research on these subjects. They show up and they do the best they can, and they did a really good job. Like, actors did a really good job, but I think people are so like far removed that these were actually real people, and it's just fine to just lie about it and to make up stuff, even if it's like maybe in his perspective, that's what he thought in his head. It's like, no, you're talking about Ed Gein, so tell the real story. Don't leave things up to interpretation. You can't just like make it obscure and maybe this happened and maybe he thought that this could happen. It's just this type of stuff, in my opinion, shouldn't exist. And that brings us to episode 4, Green. And episode 4 opens with Adeline discovering the corpse in Augusta's chair and fleeing home in terror, with Ed following her. And when he corners her in the bedroom, she demands answers. And Ed calmly admits the body isn't Augusta, but a woman he exhumed, and shockingly, Adeline responds with fascination rather than horror, asking how it felt to dig someone up. Didn't happen. And what frustrates me about Adeline as well is that she is past. She can't defend herself. You know, parents obviously passed away. All these people are deceased, and obviously they may have descendants, they may not, but they can't defend themselves in any way. So they're just twisting her story into something that never existed. And again, maybe, you know, you could say it's what Ed thought or whatever, but it's not, because he's known to say that he had zero interest in women, and that's a documented fact. He was obsessed with his mother. We know that. He wanted to be inside his mother's skin. That we know. He had.
Okay, guys, I had to go eat some dinner. Anyways, let's get on with the video.
No fascination with having any sort of relationship with anyone. Again, just dumb. Just frustrating and dumb. And then Ed then begins courting Bernice Warden, which never happened. He never had any sort of relationship with Bernice. And the lonely hardware store owner was charmed over her lunch and an ice skating date, even making plans to move in together. All false. Never happened. This was like his first attempt at life beyond his mother's shadow, but hallucinations of Augusta calling Bernice a harlot prove stronger than any chance at normalcy. So Ed breaks things off with Bernice the next day, and when she protests, he shoots her in the head. And he drags her body to his barn where he heavily mutilates and hangs it upside down in the show's most graphic sequence, which...
Would you gonna?
Hangs it upside down in the show's most graphic sequence, which, yes, I know they never had any sort of relationship, so I don't even know, put like 10 more on this. It's all just bullshit. He absolutely did cheat her. He absolutely did take her back to the barn. He absolutely did horrible things to her and mutilated her body. And I'm sure Ryan Murphy took that and he's like, wow, I don't need to make anything up about that. That's grotesque enough. We can throw in that, like, we get one truth thing and it's like the worst thing that ever happened. And when he shows the corpse to Adeline, which never happened, she's disturbingly fascinated rather than repulsed, leaning into her own darkness. It's just a completely made up thing, and I feel horrible for Adeline because none of this ever happened, and it makes her look like a really evil person when she was completely innocent in all of this. And the episode ends with a cut to filmmaker Toby Hooper, who's frustrated that Hitchcock's Psycho didn't go far enough, beginning work on what will become the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, showing how Gein's real crimes continue seeping into popular culture. Again, I don't mind this parallel. It's fine. But that's all made up. You know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Psycho, all this stuff. It's grotesque and crazy, but I love horror, you know? It's not, we're not dealing with real people, so whatever. I'd much prefer a documentary that's real and, like, you know, highlights the victims and how horrible the freaking monster that committed those crimes are, but this whole production is just sick. And that brings us to episode 5, Ice. And episode 5 shifts focus to Adeline's unraveling, and this whole episode could just be like omitted because Adeline's whole story is completely false. But anyway, it opens with her sleeping with a local farmhand, which we never knew about, as signaling her detachment from Ed, fighting with domineering mother who wants her to settle down. Adeline dreams of escaping to New York as a crime scene photographer. Not true, never happened. Over a tense dinner, she tells Ed she's leaving and urges him to come, but he's paralyzed by his devotion by Augusta's memory. Yes, he had that relationship with his mother, but there's no proof this ever happened. And when Ed pushes for intercourse and traditional family life, Adeline cruelly rejects him, mockingly suggesting that if no living woman wants him, maybe he should sleep with corpses. He never did that, by the way. There's no evidence and no confession that he ever did anything like that with the corpses. So that is a completely made up thing that Ryan Murphy thought would be just extra triggering. And I don't know, interesting to the viewer, completely made up. And this just triggers the show's most grotesque scene. And they drive to a cemetery where Ed does stuff with an exhumed body while Adeline watches, all fabricated. And Adeline heads to New York but fails miserably. Her apartment is freezing, her job interviews bomb, and when she confronts her landlord about the heat, she snaps and beats the woman to death with her shoe, robbing the body before fleeing back to Wisconsin. This never happened. This has to be, like, illegal to say people did stuff, like a full-on crime that never happened. Like, it's actually insane. This isn't even a part of, like, Ed's imagination, if you want to use that argument. She's just, like, off living her own life, and what she hurt somebody on Anyway, finding no comfort from her mother, who admits never wanting her in the first place, all made up, Adeline seeks solace with Ed, suggesting intercourse to rekindle their relationship. But Ed recoils, saying she's too warm and he can no longer connect with the living. And to prove her devotion, Adeline climbs into a bathtub of cold water while Ed dumps ice over her. And this is supposed to be like a chilling metaphor for how trauma has destroyed them both. But none of this ever happened. He never had relations with dead bodies. He never, as far as we know, he died a virgin. So yeah. And then there's episode 6, The Buxom Bird. So episode 6 finally reveals Ed Gein's House of Horrors. And And after a flashback showing Deputy Frank Warden asking his mother Bernice to host Thanksgiving dinner, we jump to present where Bernice has vanished. And Frank and Sheriff Art Skiley investigate her hardware store, finding blood splatter and package addressed to Ed Gein. In Ed's farmhouse, they discover an unimaginable nightmare. And this so far is fine. It's a little bit true. Not the whole Thanksgiving dinner thing, but, you know, at least we're a little bit true, all right? And there was actually a receipt, not a package for Ed Gein, but whatever. But at the house, they find bowls made from skulls, furniture upholstered with human skin, masks fashioned from faces, and all true. And like, Ryan Murphy doesn't need anything to dramatize that because it's as horrible as it gets. He was a monster. But just because you call a show monster doesn't mean you think he is. You're like heavily leaning into the fact that he was just this misunderstood guy who had relationships, but this is all false. Anyway, Frank's search leads to the barn where he finds his mother's headless body hanging upside down like butchered meat. True. That is true. And it's a devastating moment as a son discovers his mother's horrific fate. And Ed arrives during the investigation and is arrested while grief-stricken. And Frank attacks him. And under interrogation, Ed calmly admits to grave robbing and making keepsakes, but denies murder, even during a polygraph test. And Sheriff Skiley suspects Ed killed many more, possibly up to 200. But Ed's foggy memory prevents proving additional murders. Meanwhile, Adeline tries to sell her story to the media, but is ignored, reduced to a footnote in the horror she witnessed. So this episode is like the most loosely true so far up until this point, because Adeline did put in a quote where she's like, yeah, I know him so well, and she really wanted to sell her story and like be in the limelight for it, but she retracted everything 2 weeks later because there was just no way to prove that any of that happened. And she probably just had a conscience, and she's like, no, actually, none of that happened. But the episode ends with Frank struggling to reclaim his mother's body from the morgue for burial, then attending Thanksgiving dinner at Skiley's house. But when the sheriff carves the turkey, Frank can only see visions of Ed dismembering Bernice. All shock value, we don't know this happened, whatever, and his trauma shattering any sense of normalcy. Again, awful. She's a real human being, and she was butchered in real life. And to just like portray that in just the most horrendous way is weird and disgusting. But they actually got some things true in this one. He actually was Bernice's son. So there you go. And Watkins did give interviews to newspapers after Gein's arrest, but retracted all the statements. And Sheriff, I keep saying Skiley, sorry, it's Schlee. I don't know why I read it like that. Did assault Gein during questioning, banging his head into a wall. So that's fine. I feel like this part is like dramatic enough for Ryan not to have to do anything besides, you know, the carving turkey thing, which was just insane. But it's like the most accurate episode I think there is in the entire show. That brings us to episode 7, Ham Radio. Episode 7 finds Ed Gein declared legally insane and committed to a mental hospital instead of prison. True. While Deputy Frank Warden spirals into alcoholism, unable to cope with discovering his mother's butchered body. And Sheriff Sklee tries to talk Frank out of his plan to sue Ed's estate and auction his grotesque belongings for revenge and money, warning that turning Gein's artifacts into public spectacle is wrong, but Frank is beyond reasoning. And at the asylum, Ed settles into a childlike routine when a friendly nurse nicknamed Salty offers to buy him items with money from his property sale. So Ed requests a ham radio, believing they'll let him speak with his idols, like Nazi criminal Isla Koch and transgender pioneer Christine Jorgensen. So Ed chats with Isla, who bonds with him over their shared imprisonment before taking matters into her own hands. And then calls Christine, seeking guidance about his gender confusion. Obviously.
Anyway, see you in part 4.